Verses 17 to 20. The perplexity of the disciples upon the intimation given them, they were at a loss what to make of it. v. 17, 18. Some of them said, softly, among themselves, either some of the weakest, that were least able, or some of the most inquisitive, that were most desirous, to understand him, what is this that he saith to us? Though Christ had often spoken to this purport before, yet still they were in the dark. Though precept be upon precept, it is in vain, unless God gave the understanding. Now see here the disciples' weakness, in that they could not understand so plain a saying, to which Christ had already given them a key, having told them so often in plain terms that he should be killed, and the third day rise again. Yet, say they, we cannot tell what he saith, for sorrow had filled their heart, and made them unapt to receive the impressions of comfort. The darkness of ignorance and the darkness of melancholy commonly increase and thicken one another. Mistakes cause griefs, and then griefs confirm the notion of Christ's secular kingdom was so deeply rooted in them that they could make no sense at all of those sayings of his which they knew not how to reconcile with that notion. When we think the scripture must be made to agree with the false ideas we have imbibed, no wonder that we complain of difficulty, but when our reasonings are captivated to revelation, the matter becomes easy. It should seem, that which puzzled them was the little while. If he must go at least, yet they could not conceive how he should leave them quickly, when his stay hitherto had been so short, and so little while, comparatively. Thus it is hard for us to represent to ourselves that change is near which yet we know will come certainly, and may come suddenly. When we are told, yet a little while and we must go hence, yet a little while and we must give up our account, we know not how to digest it, for we always took the vision to be for a great while to come. Ease. 12:27-2. Their willingness to be instructed. When they were at a loss about the meaning of Christ's words, they conferred together upon it, and asked help of one another. By mutual converse about divine things we both borrow the light of others and improve our own. Observe how exactly they repeat Christ's words. Though we cannot fully solve every difficulty we meet with in Scripture, yet we must not therefore throw it by, but revolve what we cannot explain, and wait till God shall reveal even this unto us. The further explication of what Christ had said. See here why Christ explained it, v. 19, because he knew they were desirous to ask him, and designed it. Note, the knots we cannot untie we must bring to him who alone can give an understanding. Christ knew they were desirous to ask him, but were bashful and ashamed to ask. Note, Christ takes cognizance of pious desires, though they be not as yet offered up, the groanings that cannot be uttered, and even anticipates them with the blessings of his goodness. Christ instructed those who he knew were desirous to ask him, though they did not ask. Before we call, he answers. Another reason why Christ explained it was because he observed them canvassing this matter among themselves. Do you inquire this among yourselves? Well, I will make it easy to you. This intimates to us who they are that Christ will teach, the humble, that confess their ignorance, for so much their inquiry implied. The diligent, that use the means they have, do you inquire? You shall be taught. To him that hath shall be given. See here how he explained it, not by a nice and critical descant upon the words, but by bringing the thing more closely to them. He had told them of not seeing him, and seeing him, and they did not apprehend the meaning, and therefore he explains it by their sorrowing and rejoicing, because we commonly measure things according as they affect us. v. 20 You shall weep and lament, for my departure, but the world shall rejoice in it, and you shall be sorrowful, while I am absent, but, upon my return to you, your sorrow will be turned into joy. But he says nothing of the little while, because he saw that this perplexed them more than anything, and it is of no consequence to us to know the times and the seasons. Note, believers have joy or sorrow according as they have or have not a sight of Christ, and the tokens of his presence with them. What Christ says here, and in v. 21, 22, of their sorrow and joy, is primarily to be understood of the present state and circumstances of the disciples, and so we have their grief foretold. You shall weep and lament, and you shall be sorrowful. The sufferings of Christ could not but be the sorrow of his disciples. They wept for him because they loved him. The pain of our friend is a pain to ourselves. When they slept, it was for sorrow. Lu 22:45. They wept for themselves, and their own loss, and the sad apprehensions they had of what would become of them when he was gone. It could not but be a grief to lose him for whom they had left their all, and from whom they had expected so much. Christ has given notice to his disciples beforehand to expect sorrow, that they may treasure up comforts accordingly. The world's rejoicing at the same time, but the world shall rejoice. That which is the grief of saints is the joy of sinners. First, those that are strangers to Christ will continue in their carnal mirth, and not at all interest themselves in their sorrows. It is nothing to them that pass by. Lam 1:12. Nay, secondly, those that are enemies to Christ will rejoice because they hope they have conquered him, and ruined his interest. When the chief priests had Christ upon the cross, we may suppose they made merry over him, as those that dwell on earth over the slain witnesses. Revelation 11:10. Let it be no surprise to us if we see others triumphing, when we are trembling for the return of joy to them in due time, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy. As the joy of the hypocrite, so the sorrow of the true Christian, is but for a moment. The disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. His resurrection was life from the dead to them, and their sorrow for Christ's sufferings was turned into a joy of such a nature as could not be damped and embittered by any sufferings of their own. They were sorrowful, and yet always rejoicing. 2 Cor 6:10, had sorrowful lives and yet joyful hearts. It is applicable to all the faithful followers of the Lamb, and describes the common case of Christians. Their condition and disposition are both mournful, sorrows are their lot, and seriousness is their temper. Those that are acquainted with Christ must, as he was, be acquainted with grief. They weep and lament for that which others make light of, their own sins, and the sins of those about them. They mourn with sufferers that mourn, and mourn for sinners that mourn not for themselves. The world, at the same time, goes away with all the mirth. They laugh now, and spend their days so jovially that one would think they neither knew sorrow nor feared it. Carnal mirth and pleasures are surely none of the best things, for then the worst men would not have so large a share of them, and the favorites of heaven be such strangers to them. Spiritual mourning will shortly be turned into eternal rejoicing. Gladness is sown for the upright in heart, that sow tears, and without doubt they will shortly reap in joy. Their sorrow will not only be followed with joy, but turned into it, for the most precious comforts take rise from pious griefs. Thus he illustrates by a similitude taken from a woman in travail, to whose sorrows he compares those of his disciples, for their encouragement, for it is the will of Christ that his people should be a comforted people.